probably heard Nefertiti called Egypt's most beautiful queen that bust. The perfect profile, the crown. That's the myth. That's what survived because it was carved in limestone and painted with pigment that never faded. Here's what didn't survive nearly as well. She may have helped dismantle the richest religious tax system in the ancient world and rebuild it around her own household. Picture this: for centuries, grain, gold, and labor across Egypt flowed to one place, the temples of Amun. Not the palace, not the pharaoh, the priests. Then one royal family declares a new god, abandons the old capital, builds a brand new city from bare desert, and somehow, within a few years, becomes wealthier than any Egyptian royal family in generations. Historians still argue about who actually engineered that shift, the mystic pharaoh lost in religious visions, or the queen standing beside him in every single relief, the same size, performing rituals no queen had performed alone before. So here's the real question. If this was one of the most radical wealth transfers in ancient history, why do we still teach it as a story about religion and barely mention it as a story about money? Here's what surprises people first. Before Nefertiti, Egypt's real tax authority wasn't the throne. It was the temple network. For generations, priests of Amun quietly collected tribute grain, tithes, land rents, conscripted labor until the temple's treasury rivaled, and in some years exceeded, the pharaoh's own. That's the ancient equivalent of a national government discovering its central bank technically answers to someone else. When Nefertiti married Amenhotep IV, she wasn't marrying into unlimited royal power. She was marrying into a monarchy that had been slowly losing its grip on the country's wealth for a century. Here's the piece almost never mentioned. Nefertiti wasn't royal born in the way people assume. Evidence suggests she may have come from a powerful non-royal family, possibly connected to the vizier's household, elevated into the royal line through marriage rather than birthright. That mattered. A woman who married into power, rather than inheriting it automatically, has every reason to build a system that depends on her personally, not one she simply borrows and hands back. You'd expect her to play a quiet, ceremonial role. She didn't. Here's what people usually get backwards. The move to worship a single sun god, the Aten, gets taught purely as theology, a mystical religious reform. It wasn't only that. It was a hostile restructuring of the entire tax base. Every offering, every harvest tithe, every temple donation that used to flow to Amun's priesthood got redirected toward a brand new capital city built from nothing in the middle of the desert named Amarna. Imagine the logistics of that decision. Abandoning fully staffed, centuries-old temple infrastructure across the entire country and forcing the flow of the nation's wealth through one newly built city that didn't even exist 5 years earlier. And here's the detail that changes everything. In the old system, only trained male priests could stand between ordinary Egyptians and the gods. In the new system, that role collapsed onto the royal family itself, and temple reliefs from this period show Nefertiti performing rituals alone at full scale, sometimes larger than the king beside her. That's not decoration. In a system where religious authority and tax authority were the same lever, standing at that altar meant standing at the center of the money. This is where the story usually flattens into Akhenaten's religious vision, and that framing hides the real mechanism. Here's the reframe. This wasn't primarily a theological revolution that happened to shift some money around. It was an economic restructuring that used theology as its enforcement tool, because in Egypt, you couldn't challenge a tax policy directly, but you also couldn't openly challenge a god. By collapsing religious authority into the royal household, Nefertiti and Akhenaten made resistance to their tax structure functionally the same as heresy. That's the real innovation, not a new god. A new, faster, harder to challenge way to move a nation's wealth. And this is where it gets interesting, the scale and precision of the administrative shift. The new city, planned with granaries and worker housing before a single temple was finished, points toward careful, deliberate planning, not a lone mystic distracted by visions. Somebody was running the numbers. The reliefs suggest very strongly it wasn't Akhenaten alone. Something was about to break, and everyone at Amarna could feel it, even if the records don't say so directly. For close to 20 years, wealth flowed into the new capital, while the old temple network sat starved, stripped of income, watching its influence shrink year after year. That's not a stable equilibrium. That's a pressure system waiting for a crack. The crack came fast. Akhenaten died, The succession destabilized almost immediately. A series of short, unclear reigns followed, and evidence suggests Nefertiti herself may have ruled briefly under a different name during this chaotic gap before ultimately being pushed aside. Then, the boy king Tutankhamun took the throne, guided by older advisors with deep ties to the old priesthood. Amarna was abandoned. Stone by stone, over the following years, it was dismantled. The old gods returned. Sentences short. The reversal, fast. Here's the consequence nobody expects, and it's the part that makes this story worth telling. Nefertiti's name and image were chiseled off monuments almost as thoroughly as her husband's, folded into the broader erasure of the entire Amarna period. But the temples they'd starved for 2 decades didn't just snap back to full strength overnight. Rebuilding a tax base that took generations to establish takes generations to restore. The old priesthood spent years, possibly decades, recovering the wealth and influence Nefertiti's system had drained away. That's not so different from a modern executive pushed out of a company in a hostile boardroom reversal, her name scrubbed from the annual report, her office reassigned, while the restructuring she pushed through keeps reshaping the balance sheet for a decade after she's gone. Or think of it like a central bank governor removed for a controversial policy. The person disappears from headlines fast, but the actual economic effects of what she changed take years to fully unwind. Erase the name. The economic damage still has to be repaired line by line. So here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. Nefertiti wasn't written into history primarily as an economic reformer. She was written out almost entirely, folded into a religious scandal that made it easier for everyone afterward to pretend it had only ever been about faith. But redirecting where a nation's wealth flows quietly, structurally, for 2 decades is one of the most powerful moves any ruler in the ancient world ever made. Arguably more powerful and more dangerous to the people it displaced than any war Egypt fought that century. To recap, she married into a monarchy, losing its grip on its own treasury, helped engineer a religious shift that was really a hostile takeover of the national tax base, positioned herself at the exact ritual center where religious and economic authority met, and built a wealth machine so effective that even a violent political reversal couldn't fully undo the damage to the old system for years. That's not a footnote to a mystic pharaoh's story. That's the architecture underneath it. And there's one thread we still haven't pulled. Nefertiti's mummy has never been definitively identified. Several candidates have been proposed, tested, and disputed for decades. The most visually documented queen in ancient Egyptian history is, physically, still missing. So which do you think mattered more in the end, the new god everyone remembers, or the tax system quietly hiding behind him that almost nobody talks about? Because one of them reshaped Egypt's economy for a generation. Tell me which one you think it really was down in the comments.